Welcome back to XJW Diaries. My name is Justin. So today I have yet another special interview for you guys with yet another former elder who is speaking out. And this former elder also happens to be a former Bethelite. So there's a whole lot to unpack in this video. I really hope you guys enjoy it. And as usual, I want to express my gratitude to this person for coming onto the channel with the hope of trying to help others who are in this process of waking up. Now, there's a whole lot of details throughout this entire interview. You'll get to hear about some very interesting things that were happening at Bethel during his time serving there, and you'll get an inside look behind the scenes of how the elder body actually operates, how decisions are actually made. And it's a whole lot more political than most Jehovah's Witnesses realize. Now, since this is a longer interview, around the 2-hour mark, I've added timestamps at the bottom so you can jump from one subject to the next as you see fit, whatever interests you. I really hope you guys enjoy this interview. This is Gary. So, Gary, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have a wealth of information to share about the hidden side of how the elder body actually operates and some stuff about Bethel and how they operate. But before we get into that, can you just briefly go into how you got involved with the witnesses in the first place?
Yeah, I was raised, well, my father was Catholic and my mom had been raised Baptist, but because that was a problem for my father's family was like half Catholic, half Lutheran, and they didn't really like the idea that he married a Baptist. I'm not sure what the problem is, but whatever. So the agreement was to raise the kids something more toward the center, whatever that means. And so my brother and sister started out Methodist, but by the time I came along and started going to church, it was a Lutheran church. So I guess I was raised Lutheran. I don't know. In my early teens, my mom took us to a Baptist church for a little bit at a time and didn't really resonate with me either. But I was, when I was 15, for the last several years, I had been increasingly disturbed about news in general, like things that were going on with Vietnam. Was just bad news every day, and other things that were going on in the world. And I, started to really understand politics, well, to an immature extent, I guess, but I started to pay attention to it. So I was just wondering, like, what in the world is going on with this world we live in? Where's it going? How do I even know what I should study and go to college for if it's so volatile? So I was really kind of disturbed about the world scene in general, and of course, you know how the witnesses prey on that. It's whatever. Like if you lost a loved one in death, that's the thing they target. They say, "Would you like to see your loved one again?" Or they say, the famous thing is, if you could just fix one thing in the world, what would you want to fix? And if you answer that question, you're opening yourself up for the cult experience, because now they know the main button to press. So the main button to press with me was what happens to people when they die, because I was really concerned about that. I had read Dante's Inferno and I thought, like, that's really horrible. I don't believe it, but what if, it's pretty horrendous. But that and all the other world conditions. So I started studying with a friend of mine. His name is Charlie. I'll tell you that now, because he's been out for like, geez, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. And we reunited in recent years because I'm out now. So why not? And so he doesn't mind me mentioning his name. But I studied with Charlie when I was 15. He was 16. And that's basically it. The thing I will tell you, though, that's I think important to my story and everything else I'm going to tell you, is that where I came in, it was Westbury, Long Island, New York, just a little bit east of Brooklyn, New York. So my family's all from New York City. In fact, I was born in Brooklyn. But I will tell you that the way things worked in the Westbury congregation were very, very different from virtually every congregation I've ever been in. I didn't know it was different at the time. I thought this is normal. But it was different in the sense that they really didn't, the elders really did not make rules. They did not dictate, you can't go to college. Disfellowshippings were rare. I mean, don't even remember, in the whole time I was there, I can only remember maybe 2 people being disfellowshipped. There were probably more, but it just wasn't a big thing. So they didn't like, automatically clamp down on everything the way they do nowadays. And I thought that was the way it is. But as I started to go to other congregations, especially moving, I started to see the differences. And they didn't surprise me. The differences didn't surprise me because realistically, you can't expect the same thing in every congregation. But I just assumed that they were correctable because the way things are supposed to work is how they worked in Westbury, right? And I just thought that was normal. That's what was expected. That was what was supposed to be. And I really thought that if you had enough guys in these other congregations where there are certain problems, that if they worked to correct them, they would be corrected. Not necessarily to the point of perfection, obviously, but so that's my story. I mean, I was 16 when I got baptized in 1975, the year the world ended. Um, so somehow we survived that. Yeah, so that's how I came in.
Wow. So you came in during 75.
Hmm.
Did that play into any part in you reaching out to step up to be an elder or reaching out to become a Bethelite?
No, what it did was they didn't emphasize it. Like I said, the guys in Westbury were very different. There was no, why don't you sell your house and you know, buy a trailer and Pioneer. There was none of that. None. Actually, any kind of ripples of that was within the congregation itself, and the elders did their part to. If they detected it, they would say, "Hey, it's nice. It's nice that you want to do that, but you got to think practically too." So that's the way they really were that way. They really were not judgmental and everything. So when I first heard that 1975 was some kind of significant year, I really don't remember where I heard that from. Of course, it was in the publications, but I don't think anybody from the platform ever said it. At circuit assemblies, they probably did. You'd have these guys that would say 232 days till the end of the sixth creative day or whatever the heck the marker was. I forget what they called it, but or the beginning of the seventh day, I guess. I don't know. So it wasn't a big thing, but since I did hear it, it did affect me as a 15-year-old kid, soon to be 16. I was born the last day of the year, so by 75, I was 16 in one day. Um, it did resonate with me, and I was kind of in love with the idea that the world's going to end, not just in my lifetime, but like really, really soon. Because I was sick of the world. I just, like I told you, all the stuff with Vietnam and all these other big variables. I was kind of tired of the whole thing, and I thought, yeah, God's kingdom's going to come in this year. That's fine with me. So that kind of did affect my desire to get baptized quickly, because I remember talking to my buddies. We were all around the same age. The congregation was so full of young people; it was unbelievable. There were just like scores and scores of people of all ages, from like 5 to 20. I mean, so I had a lot of friends, and I remember sitting around asking them about 1975, and I'm like, "Does that mean that it's the end of the system?" And they'd say, "Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't know." And then I remember asking them, "Do you have to be baptized to survive Armageddon?" And I remember my friend Don saying, "Well, yeah, I think so." Like he wasn't really sure, but I thought, well, if that's the best answer I've heard, the most authoritative answer I've heard so far. So I thought I'd better get baptized, and it was actually discouraged. I had been studying for a little over half a year, and I went through 2 books. I went through the Truth book and the old True Peace and Security book in 6 months. In fact, I was done with them like within 4 months actually, and I was doing like, oh geez, other books I don't even know. And so anyway, I made it known to my teacher Charlie that I wanted to get baptized, and he's like, "Oh well, okay." And then he told his mother, and she was like, "I don't know, Gary. That's kind of a big step, you know. You hope you know what you're doing. You're kind of new at this, you know." And so then I remember I told the elder that did the first set of questions. I think they still do it this way, where they do they do three sets of questions. Um, and I just told him what Sylvia had told me, and he says, "Well, we'll see, you know." And then at the end of the session, the other 3 guys just didn't know how to answer any questions. It was really remarkable. I answered almost all the questions. Um, One in particular answered no questions. It was really amazing. So I kind of realized from that alone that I knew the Bible better than these guys. But that's not necessarily a qualification to get baptized. So after the thing, the elder that was doing it said, "Well, Gary, your knowledge of the scriptures is very good, and you answer quite well." And that's all he said. And I took that to mean that, yeah, you're ready to get baptized. So I did. I don't know. Anyway, so the point I'm making is that they discouraged it. There, like I said, there were a lot of things that were anomalous about Westbury. They just didn't baptize 11 or 12-year-old kids and stuff like that. They had more sense than that. I guess the rest of the organization doesn't. So that's as far as the 1975 thing affected me. As far as other decisions, like whether or not to go to college, what to do for a living, um, it really didn't affect me because, I mean, by the time I graduated high school, it was 1976. So it was pretty clear that any prediction of 75 being the year is already dead in the water. And then, I went to Bethel in 81. I mean, I always had the sense, like anybody in the organization is supposed to have, that the end is imminent. We don't know what year, what day, but it could be this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years, but it's going to be soon, whatever soon means. It's going to be in our lifetime. So I always had that sense of urgency you're supposed to have. But it didn't really affect me. I saw other people, not a lot, because like I said, Westbury didn't do things this way. But I did see other people that were like making rash decisions. Including things like not taking care of their health. The thing that the witnesses are famous for, making really bad financial decisions. I did see a certain number of people doing that. But honestly, after it was all said and done, in that particular congregation, you could not blame it on the direction from the platform. You could perhaps blame it on what was in the publications because they were kind of vague about it, and they kind of. I just remember that they used to not say you should sell your house, but they would say if someone decides to do that, what a commendable thing that is. I mean, so what's the difference? They're pretty much encouraging it anyway. So to answer your question, it didn't really affect me personally that much, except for the initial decision to get baptized.
Wow. Yeah, that word commendable. That's
Yeah,
that's enough to get most witnesses moving in whatever direction they mention.
yeah.
So you end up at Bethel in the mid 80s. Can you go
Mhm.
into a little bit of your experiences at Bethel, and did anything surprising happen while you were there?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that surprised the heck out of me was that, and this is late '81, was that there were disfellowshippings like almost constantly, like at least once a week, if not a couple times a week. There were 1 to 3 or 4 people being announced as disfellowship, and I thought, wow. I mean, in 1 week they did more than they did in all the years I was in Westbury. And I just thought, is this normal? I guess it is. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. But then they eventually had a talk to the whole family that was like the Bethel family. That was family only. You couldn't have any overnight guests attend this particular. It was after the Watchtower study on Monday night. Normally guests would come to the Watchtower study, but this night they said no guests, no overnight guests, and it was all about sex. That was what they. It was all about homosexuality primarily. Um, but there were other things too. Other things that homosexuality was shocking to me at the time because of course, being a loyal witness, I considered it like the ultimate immoral thing to do. I suppose I don't know. My attitude has shifted considerably since then, but there were other things that going on that would shock anybody. I mean, anybody in any religion or not in any religion. I don't want to go into them. Well, I will if you want me to, but I wrote a book about this stuff too. So if you really want details, you should go to that. But that was a shocker. And then another shocker that came up a little while later was something they called opening up, and this is something I discussed in my book also. But essentially, it was hazing. It was like college level hazing. That was actually, there were guys that ended up with broken ribs, um, loss of property like suits and stuff like that because of the way they were treated. And it was considered normal in the press room and the construction departments where it's like the guys are like He-Man, I guess. Um, they're like the most physically fit guys, I guess, in the organization. And that when the governing body found out about that, they were pretty ticked off. But apart from that, in terms of more, things that are not, I mean, you'd expect the governing body to deal with those things, but things that would be scandalous in the other direction, like what basically happened was Ray Fran's resignation, from the governing body happened just a little bit before I went to Bethel, so I never met him, but people were talking about it a lot. He was still considered in good standing, and was living in Alabama. And everybody and of course, all these other so-called apostates had already been dismissed, or even some that weren't at Bethel were disfellowshipped also. So there was, I guess, a certain amount of like wondering if Ray has something to do with that. But people were genuinely concerned about him because they loved him. Everybody thought he was just a super humble man that was part of the governing body, and they were concerned about him. And then when he disassociated himself and the society changed its way that is handled after he disassociated himself, they made it the same as disfellowshipping in terms of the way we're supposed to treat that person. They did that after he resigned, after he had disassociated himself, which no court in the world would do. No court would sentence you to something that was not the sentence at the time of the crime. So but anyway, they do what they want, don't they? So when we heard about that, or when we read the article in the Time magazine, I can't remember which happened first, but when we read that article in Time, it was like the 1 or 2 page article in the back of the magazine about Ray Franz and the predictions of 1975 coming and going, and now what are we supposed to do? That's when it was open season on Ray Franz, and the way people would talk about him and the other so-called apostates was horrendous. They would just, it didn't bother me so much because I agreed that, he's like Judas Iscariot, who needs this guy? But I just didn't see that it was necessary to go back in their memory to everything every interaction they ever had with him and kind of revisit it and say like, yeah, you know what? I did notice that he has a tendency to do this and do that. You know how people do that? Even anytime anybody's disfellowship, they start thinking like, yeah, I always noticed that he used to make funny comments, and all of a sudden it's like you found a rationale for the person being disfellowshipped. And they did the same thing with Ray Franz. Very disingenuous. So those are the revelations. And then the other thing that happened while I was there was, just at the tail end actually, was when Leo Greenlees was dismissed from the governing body. And it was handled as a dismissal. The wording was very similar to what they said recently about Anthony Morris, so it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can't draw any conclusions from the way they announce things like that, because they're deliberately done in such a nebulous way that you're supposed to believe that it was handled, and that's all you need to know. But it took a while to figure out what was going on with Leo Greenlees, and I discussed that in my book too. Because he was just dismissed, and he wasn't disfellowshipped, and he was sent to a congregation, I think initially in California, but he ended up in Louisiana, I think, in the New Orleans area. I forget really, maybe it was Florida, but anyway, he life went on as usual. He just wasn't on the governing body anymore. But of course, you find out eventually that it was almost certainly because of pedophilia was the reason for his dismissal. So it was just interesting the way they cover things up, because in the case with Franz, I specifically remember them discussing with the family, just briefly, like an announcement kind of thing at the breakfast table, which is where all the stuff happens. They call that morning worship. A lot of people have been asking, how is Ray doing? We're concerned about him. And they announced in a sentence or two, it was just a really brief announcement, just that he's fine. He's living in Alabama, and he's fine. He's still a faithful servant, and thank you for asking. Don't worry about it. When you look at the timeline that's easily established by reading Crisis of Conscience, Ray's book, and even if you don't believe anything that Ray says, it's just obvious that this was the time this stuff happened. All the time that they were making that announcement, about how don't worry about it, he's faithful, he's this and that, was that was the time that he was going back and forth and sending, wanting more clarification and answers to things, and they were ignoring him, and the witch hunt was going on with other so-called apostates. It was all at the same time, all at the same time. So we were basically lied to when they said, yeah, he's fine, because they were after him. They were clearly after him, and they wanted him out for good, and that's what happened. Meanwhile, they're making these announcements to the family, don't worry about it, everything's fine. So those were there are other things. I mean, I could go on for hours, I suppose, about Bethel Experiences, but those are the big things that were kind of a shock to me.
Wow. That's like, I don't even know what to say to some of those things. It's just not what you would expect from Bethel. As someone that I never even visited Bethel.
Yeah.
So that place has always had this mystique about it. Can you go a little bit into, before we get into the elder stuff, just what your day-to-day life at Bethel was like, what it was like working there? I know you mentioned that your wife was there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we went there because I was in computers. I wasn't actually a pioneer before. I never regular pioneered, which is usually a de facto requirement for going to Bethel. You have to have been in full-time service, but I never was. But I was a computer programmer. And, because we were so close, and we had an elder that worked in the legal department, an elder in Westbury worked in legal. He did pretty much all their real estate deals. He closed them. So we used to have Bethel speakers out all the time, including governing body members. And I mean, I remember inside of a couple of years, at least 3 governing body members, one that became a governing body member. Sam Hurd was our circuit overseer for a while. Ted Jarrahs, Grant Suter, I don't know, so many others would come by. So we had a sort of direct line. So that had a lot to do with my application. Grant Suter was the one that actually gave me my application. He actually mailed it to me personally. And then Dan Sidlick was the one that kind of pushed it through because it wasn't going anywhere. And I met Ciro Alessino at a friend's congregation in the Bronx where he was giving his first public talk. And Ciro said, we chatted a little bit. He said, well, let me talk to a friend of mine. He works in personnel. He'll push it through. Well, it turns out he was talking about Dan Sidlick. So that's your friend, and he just works in personnel. Okay, whatever. But he was a governing body member. So all these guys had to do with it getting pushed through. Anyway, from my first time, I was at what they call a Gilead table for our meals. A Gilead table is basically where there are Gilead students for the missionary school. And a Gilead table always has a governing body member at the foot of the table, and his wife if he's married. And it would rotate every week. It would be a different one, alphabetically sorts. So it started out with, I don't know, I guess Bar was probably the first in the alphabet. No, Barber was first, and then Barry, and then and like Schroeder would be, I guess, close to last. So they go. So you'd meet these guys. I mean, there were 15 at the time. So in 15 weeks, you've met pretty intimately all members of the governing body, eating breakfast and lunch with them, and in addition to all the other stuff that you see them throughout the day and everything. So that was my experience. And then when the rotation got done, it would go right back to the beginning of the alphabet. So you'd say, "Oh, how you doing?" I worked in the computer department, and that was Grant Suter's. He was not the overseer of the department, but he was the chairman of the Administrative Data Committee, which was the committee that kind of managed our department. So I worked with the treasurer's office. I worked with cost accounting, which is basically the New York corporation. Treasurer's office is like the Pennsylvania corporation, kind of, but that's where all the banking happens, and that's where they do all the investments from and everything. So yeah, I worked with these guys, and then the other thing is I was always on Family Night, which was an entertainment show that by members of the family for the family, and I played piano. I played other instruments too, but I always played the piano on Family Night. And so I knew Dan Sidlick really well because of that. And Carl Klein was featured on one, so we spent time in his room. He was a governing body member. So hanging out with these governing body guys was a fairly normal thing for me. I don't know if it's everybody's experience because it just depends where you work and what you do and where you eat and everything. But for me, it was like a day-to-day thing. Just getting to know every single one of those guys to some level of intimacy, some more than others. So that was typical. But Bethel, I mean, the typical day at Bethel starts at like at least 6:30. That's if you're lazy, if like me, because I'm just not a morning person. I don't do well with mornings. And so I would get up at like 6:30 when the bell would go off. These loud clanging bells. You felt like you were in a, I don't know, like in a prison or something, or a hospital. I don't know, some place where they have, or some kind of factory where these bells go off all day. So there's a bell at like 6:30, I think, to wake up if you haven't already woken up. A bell at 5 to 7 to say you got 5 minutes to get to the table. And then I don't know, bells at there's bells all day long. I don't know, they're really loud and obnoxious. So I would get up at 6:30. Struggle to get a shower because it was we shared the bathroom with everybody else on the floor. That's the way most of the home was in those days. And then breakfast was at 7 o'clock. So it was, morning worship was, the chairman was always a governing body member. Now it doesn't. Nowadays it doesn't have to be a governing body member, but it's a what we call a heavy, one of those guys that's got a lot of responsibility. But but it was the governing body at that time. And this is historically, it was always just the president. Back in Russell's day, Rutherford's day, Nor's day, it was just the president that presided over breakfast every single day of the year, except weekends. And so by the time I got there, it was the whole governing body would take turns. But anyway, you'd start at 7. It would be about a 20-minute discussion of the day's text, and then talk by the governing body member, and then you ate breakfast, and then you were on your way to work. So work was like 8 to 5:10 or 5:15 or something, and you had to work Saturdays, from like 8 to 12, I guess. You got 1 week off, one Saturday off a month until you got to a certain age, and then you got 2. And sisters always had to work 1 less, and then after a certain age, you just get off Saturdays altogether. I don't really know, but that was a typical day at Bethel. And then you were assigned to a congregation. So I was in Columbus Circle, which is the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So about 100th Street and Central Park West is where the Kingdom Hall was. So we went there. I don't know, I forget our schedule, but like Sunday morning was our book study, and the public talk was like Tuesday night or something bizarre, because there were actually 7 congregations in the one Kingdom Hall, so it was pretty crazy. Two Kingdom Halls in one building, so it was 3 and 4, but whatever. It was a lot of craziness. And in addition to that, we had the Monday night Watchtower study, in addition to the Watchtower study at the regular meeting of the congregation. And then, there were other things that kept you busy, but, there was dish duties and what is it? Watchman duties. That's the men only. The brothers only would have watchman duties. So I was in the factory. I would just walk around for my, I don't know what it was, like a 6 or 8 hour shift or whatever it was, just like turning these keys and, making sure that nothing untoward is happening. That's it in a nutshell, really. There's a lot more I could talk about, but that's the basic routine.
Nice, interesting, very interesting. So everything I've heard has made it like a witness military. That's pretty much what it sounds like. They want you to at a certain time, and they kind of work you hard.
Yeah, it's regimented for sure, and that's one of the things I didn't like about it. I loved being in the center of activity and, seeing all the governing body members all the time and just hearing, like, I just felt like I'm hearing the official, the official line every day. But yeah, the regimentation of it kind of got to me because, again, I'm not a morning person, so I naturally do not want to get up at 6:30. It doesn't work for me. There's nothing in the world that's ever going to get me used to that kind of schedule. Even when I used to get up at like 4:30 in the morning, not too many years ago, for a certain job I had helping somebody, I did it, but I hate it. So I wasn't in love with it. Plus, it's very, very rule bound. You know how they always say that the elders are not supposed to make rules for the congregation, and they really aren't. Like when they used to say you have to have a white shirt to give a talk in this congregation, white shirt and a dark tie. They're really not supposed to make rules like that, but they do, and I could talk about that a little bit later how that happens. But at Bethel, because it is a family, so, I mean, it's not really a family in any sense of the word, but they call it a family. But in other words, it's an institutionalized way of living where it's like anywhere you live, there might be rules about no pets or no smoking or whatever. So they have to have rules, so which is reasonable, obviously. But the rules got absurd. I mean, just some of the things were just so. I don't know. I could probably remember a couple of them, but it got to the point where it's like anytime anything ever happened that they didn't want to happen, they'd have to figure out a way to make sure it never happens again, as opposed to just realizing that it probably won't anyway. Or if we just tell the family about it, they'll have a sense to not do it again. No, they always had to make a rule. So that got to be, because I'm just not a real rule friendly kind of guy. Like I stop for red lights and stuff, but I don't think life should be a bunch of rules. So that, yeah, between that and the regimentation, it kind of, I was kind of, when I finally left, I was sort of happy to go. Like I didn't think I was going to miss it at all, and I didn't. But at the same time, it was really difficult because I kind of felt like the what I did at Bethel was probably the most I could ever do for the organization and for this cause, for this movement, whatever you want to call it, the whole preaching of the good news. I can't do anything more important than my work on the computers, because it's not everybody that can do that. It's not like I'm a lawyer or a doctor, but still, it's a skilled job that not everybody has. So I thought leaving Bethel is like letting down the creator of the universe, you know, like he let me do this because because I was willing to, and I had the skills, and now I'm letting him down. I'm saying, no thanks. That's kind of the way I feel, which is ridiculous to feel that way, and that I don't think anybody really encouraged that. It was in my own head. But anyway, it was sort of this conflict of like I can't wait to leave, but that included like I really don't want to leave because I don't want to let down my creator. So, but yeah, it was regimented. I guess military is right, probably the right way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very interesting. So you leave Bethel. I'm assuming were you an elder while you were at Bethel, or did you become an elder after you left Bethel?
I was first appointed a ministerial servant when I was at Bethel,
Okay.
and I was giving public talks and everything, but I was not an elder. I wasn't made an elder yet. That was just about a year later. What happened was we got pregnant. My wife got pregnant. That's why we had to leave, and we went back to where we were from. But we didn't stay there very long. I think we were there for. I always forget. I just forget the time and everything. But certainly by the same time next year, like a little bit after our daughter was born, we moved to Northwest New Jersey, and I was appointed an elder there pretty quickly. Actually, I think it was at least within the first year I was there. It was really pretty quick. I was first reappointed as a ministerial servant, giving public talks. I don't think I ever conducted a book study at that point, but they made me account servant, which in this particular congregation, because of the mentality, I will say, of the elder body, it was considered like whoever's doing the accounts is probably going to be the next elder. That might sound like very odd, and that's because it is. But I guess they just felt that you got to be like a virtual genius to handle the accounts, which you don't. It's really super easy. And if you're really, really smart, that's a really great qualification for being an elder, which is strange because most elders are not super gifted in intellect. I mean, I've known some that are really smart guys, but it's not a qualification for being an elder. But in this, and certainly not in this congregation, but it was just like a boost. It's like this guy was at Bethel. He was doing a really great job with the accounts, and he's out in service all the time, goes to all the meetings and comments. We got to make him an elder. So I was made an elder pretty quickly in that congregation, which really opened my eyes because that was one of the congregations that was vastly different from Westbury.
Oh, wow. Okay, so now you're an elder. So can
Yeah.
you give us an inside look of what it's like to be an elder, how the body actually operates, how it connects to the branch? I know you have a lot of experiences and information on that. So take
Yeah.
your time with that as much as you want.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'll just kind of try to do a brain dump, but feel free to interrupt me and everything, and kind of bring it down to earth. Uh, the congregation that I happened to go to was very different from Westbury. Like I said, very controlling, very rule oriented. Anything that's happened that was a problem, they made a rule. Punishment was a big deal. They had to punish people. not, and I don't mean just as fellowshipping, but in terms of how they would be used in the congregation and how they'd be treated. It was like the punishment was just a really big feature, and I never ever thought that made any sense. Guilting people into things is just. But and I realized that's well, when the farther you get away from Brooklyn is what we used to say. The farther you get away from Brooklyn, the more crazy things you're going to find. There's a certain amount of truth to that, but at the same time, you can be in a congregation in the middle of Texas where they do things much closer to the way they're supposed to be done. When I say supposed to be, I'm going to probably say that a bunch of times throughout this, but I mean from that organization's viewpoint. I don't mean what's actually correct in the real world. So just so I'm clear about that. And according to what the Bible seems to be saying, according to the way the witnesses interpret it, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's crazy, but anyway, so I just realized that, well, things are not perfect here, but they're a good bunch of people. So when I was appointed an elder, I started to see like immediately why some things are sort of aberrant in this congregation. And I wasn't looking for, like, I didn't go to the congregation thinking I'm on a mission. I'm going to solve problems here. I just went there as a person who needs a place to live with their family and wants to serve in the congregation. And I looked for the good in people. I remember a circuit overseer that used to say that. He'd say, when I come to visit the congregations, I look for the positive things, and the negative things have a way of becoming evident, and that's when we deal with them. But I don't come looking for negative things. So that's kind of the way I always looked at it. I'm just here to find the positive, the expressions of true faith in people. But you do see certain things that are sort of goofy. Nothing alarming, I guess, but as soon as I was appointed and I saw how the elders work, I was like, oh my God, of course this is a problem. Like, of course it is. These guys don't know what they're doing. They really just don't. See, I don't know where to begin. One of the first things that happened was the presiding overseer was he's not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. So for all I know, he's watching this broadcast. I don't know. So I don't want to say anything personal about the guy, but I think he was mistreated. And I was part of the mistreatment because it came to my attention from one guy who I'll just say I'll just refer to him as the bully because he was a classic bully. And it showed up in everything that he did. So I'll just say the bully. He pointed out to me, just between the two of us, that there were certain problems with the presiding overseer, which now is what they call the Kobe, the coordinator of the body of elders. This doesn't get done. This doesn't get done. He's a laughing stock at work, and he's a lazy guy, and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, this is just now I could see why these different things are never taken care of. So I sort of like. The bully and I sort of formed a bit of a power block, actually, which happens on elder bodies all the time. You have these little power blocks, 2 or 3 guys that are of the same mind and of something, or they have the same agenda. I don't know if it happens everywhere, but I think it's common anyway. And I just kind of went along with it because I thought, yeah, this is a problem. And he was really kind of railroaded out. And I remember the circuit overseer not agreeing with us, But anyway, he had to go because the pressure that everybody put on him made him so depressed that he ended up making some bad decisions in his personal life, and he ended up having to not be an elder anymore anyway. And then what happened was the bully became very obvious to me what a bully he was. I saw how he was mistreating, especially the younger guys in the congregation, but even anybody really. There was a fellow that was probably in his 40s at the time, and he never was a ministerial servant. I don't know if he wanted to be or not, but they just didn't like him or something. But he would do things like handle the sound and or handle the microphone or something like that. And the bully, he had a way of humiliating people in front of the whole congregation. Just the way he would go up right in the middle of the meeting and like grab the mic from somebody and say, "No, you got to hold it like this," or he'd go like this, like turn the sound up in front of the whole congregation. And so this one particular guy didn't appreciate the humiliation of it, so he ignored him. Which, okay, that's fine. That's a response, but it was a mistake because the bully's going to go after him. So one of the first things I had to do was sit down with this guy the 45-year-old that wasn't doing the sound right with the bully, and I saw him in action. He just went after this poor guy, like you want to have anything to do in the congregation, you better listen to me. I mean, that's basically was his whole thing. He was just so obvious, and I remember talking to him on the side and saying I was just about to say his name, bully. I'd say, yeah, I think that I would like to hear him express himself a little bit, because I think he's a good guy, like what. So we went with him again, and this fellow that was the object of the bully's wrath, he humbled himself. It had to be because he was a 10 times smarter than the bully. The bully was not a smart guy by any means. A very, very lowly laborer kind of job in the real world, and just and that's why he was a bully, because he was always mistreated at work and everything. He's nobody. And this is typical of one of the problems with elders, by the way, is that they're nobody in the sense of how the world looks at them. They don't have special jobs. They don't make a lot of money. Nobody goes to them with questions. Nobody goes to them for advice, And now all of a sudden you're king of the world in this little 820 member congregation, and that's his chance to be this bully, So anyway, so the 45-year-old guy humbled himself and he said, he just basically did it right, and so afterwards the conclusion was like, yeah, I guess we can let him keep doing sound. Big deal. I don't know. Anyway, that's the kind of nonsense that would happen. That was simple stuff. But it got very crazy with much bigger things. But that was my first entry into the world of eldership. Was this really, honestly, it was like an insane asylum. Because what I saw was that the big need in the congregation was for the elders to, if they're going to continue as elders, and I wasn't looking to get anybody removed, but if they're going to continue, is that they have to start treating people maybe a little closer to the way Jesus actually treated people. Wouldn't that be kind of nice, And I don't have like a monopoly on knowledge of how to do that, but I knew more than these guys anyway, And so I considered that kind of the most important thing I could do at the moment, is just to work within this congregation and not worry about what's going on outside and the rest of the circuit and the rest of the world. And I guess that's partly why over the years I always just looked at it as this organization is God's organization. It's got His Holy Spirit, and it's the only one on earth that you can say that about. And I know there are imperfections everywhere you go, but I never really looked that far beyond our own congregation in terms of what can I do to help, because I had so much to do right there. So that's partly why I stayed in for so long, because I thought I have something to do here, and everything outside of here is okay for as far as I know. Let's just work with this. So that's the beginning of it.
The elder body is another thing that kind of has this mystique about it.
Yeah. And the mystique is deliberate. I always call it the white smoke, because that's the way the Catholic Church lets everybody know that the Pope has just been selected, the new Pope. And according to my book editor, actually, who's my Catholic cousin, that's when the society derides the Catholic, whatever those guys are, the cardinals or whatever, that do that make the white smoke go up, and they try to get everybody to think that God made that white smoke. She said, no, that's not what it is, Gary. It's very simple. It's just a way of communicating, because white smoke means whatever. It means we're done. We picked the Pope. Green smoke means something else. Gray smoke, it's just that, and nobody thinks, oh, that's God making the white smoke. That's just what the Watchtower taught you. So that was a lot of crap. But I call it the white smoke. The whole concept that we're supposed to regard every appointed man as appointed by Holy Spirit. In other words, a decision was made in heaven by God Himself that this guy is going to be an elder in such and such a congregation, and that's the whole Holy Spirit mystique. It's obviously crazy, because I know of cases of people that were appointed while they were having adulterous affairs, or while they were embezzling money from the company they worked for. I mean, really horrendous things that these guys were doing. And of course, we've all heard about the KGB guys and the Stasi guys in East Germany and Russia and the Soviet Union that were actually infiltrating the organization and going all the way up to district overseer. Well, obviously they weren't appointed by Holy Spirit, according to the way the Watchtower would describe it. So, but they have to maintain that idea, because otherwise how could we ever have respect for the elders? And then, in the organization book, it used to say something to the effect that, that all these guys are appointed by Holy Spirit. If a brother, while he's an elder, if in his life he is not, I don't know how they worded it, but like if he is not, continuing to live in a way that the Holy Spirit is blessing him, he can lose that approval by the Holy Spirit. So, and that's just their way of explaining it, that when a person is no longer an elder and it's announced that he's no longer an elder, that it's just, well, as of now, as of this day, he's not appointed by Holy Spirit, but it always was before. Everything he did and said was according to Holy Spirit. So that's part of that mystique. One of the things that happened right away, like I started to say before, that after the presiding overseer was dealt with, we got somebody else to replace him. I can't remember who it was, but the bully continued his bullying, and then I started to see it really clearly. That's why I told you the story about the fellow with the sound system and all that jazz. But I saw that like all the time. I saw this incredible bullying and controlling attitude. And so I started to try to correct that. And he wasn't the only one that did that. It's just that he was the most effective at it. And he basically bullied the whole elder body. They just all were in submission of him. So one of the things that I did was I talked to the circuit overseer about how one of the things that he does is that no matter what the elder body decides as a result of an elder meeting, if he didn't agree with the decision, which he usually does because he had so much influence, but sometimes it wouldn't go his way, and he would just make sure that it was carried out the way he wanted it to be. So if, like, let's say the elders decided that we're going to, I don't know, do such and such at all the meetings for field service from now on, and he didn't agree with it, so he would just make it that it didn't, like we would forget about it because he made it so that it didn't happen that way. It's just kind of hard to explain, but he carried it out the way he wanted it to be, not the way the elders decided. So the circuit overseer told me, well, you're the secretary, right? So I was the secretary for most of the time. And he says, so you document the elders meetings, you scribe the meetings, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, just make sure you notate every decision that's made. What's supposed to happen? Who's supposed to carry this out? Who are the two elders that are going to talk to so-and-so about whatever? And have everybody sign off on it so that you can go back and say, hey, bully, it's hard to say that because I want to say his real name, but this is what we agreed to. Remember, you signed it. I can. Am I on camera here? You signed it. So this is what we decided, right? So like, where'd you really come off like doing all this other stuff here? Well, I got in trouble for that immediately because like I said, there were a couple of other guys that were kind of in his corner. Everybody supported him because he was the bully, but there were a couple of guys that were in particular, like, always agreed with him. And they formed a power block, and all of a sudden he kind of came attacking me. And what ended up happening was at one point, and this is going to get to like how the elder bodies actually operate, because this is universal pretty much. At one point, I showed up at an elders meeting, and two people were missing: the bully and this other guy who was a new appointee, the youngest, a very smart guy, very good, dedicated person, but he was new, and or relatively new, and he had grown up from a kid to what he was now, like 30 or whatever, in the congregation with this bully. So he always looked up to him like everybody did, right? So they're the only two that are not at the meeting, and so finally the newer guy comes in, and I'll just say Keith. That was not his name, but I'll just say Keith. So Keith comes in, and he's all like red-faced and a bit sweaty and just sort of out of breath, and everybody's like, well, what's going on? And they said, do you know where Jack is? Jack, I just said his name, but anyway, so Jack is the bully. Okay, so do you know where he is? And he said, yeah, and he said that he called me over to his house, and he told me that he's not going to come to any more elders meetings as long as Gary's there. And in fact, he's not going to serve as an elder as long as Gary is there. Well, what what? First of all, that made me feel really horrible, but because I didn't want to see that happen. I wanted him to correct himself, not do that. But that had the effect of all of a sudden everybody hated me because he had been there much longer than me, and everybody loved him, even though he was a bully and everything. And so now all of a sudden they're talking about they want to get rid of me, and they're seriously talking about like eliminating me from the elder body. But they did it a little closer to the right way. So basically, what happened is we announced to the congregation that he wasn't serving anymore. But then we get a letter from the service department saying to tell the congregation that the announcement regarding bully was premature and incorrect, and that he continues to serve as an elder. And of course, I still was an elder. And they said, we want him and Brother Alt to serve together, and to and it'll be resolved when the next circuit overseer thing comes up. So what that basically says about the way things work is that, and this is a fact, I can tell you another couple of stories, which I hope I will, that there are certain things that unless they're unanimous, and including the circuit overseer and even to some degree the service department, they don't happen if they're not unanimous. The service department can just do something outright, but typically it's like every elder has to agree to this thing. And so the way it had been handled, it wasn't to their liking. So they kind of put it back to the way it was. And when the circuit overseer came around, he eventually, a lot of things happened. I mean, this transpired over years, so a lot of circuit overseer visits. But what eventually happened was our presiding overseer moved to Florida, and they were trying to figure out who's going to be the next presiding overseer. And a majority of because of one person, there was a majority that wanted me to do it. I voted for myself because I thought we don't have another choice. I didn't, for a minute, or at least looking back on it, I did not qualify for the job. I really don't think I did, but I just thought somebody has to do it, and if it's going to be the bully if I don't do it, So, but then what happened was, by the time the circuit overseer came around, he had politicked among the rest of them and got one of them to raise his hand with the circuit overseer there and say, like, I don't really think that's the best idea. I was thinking that the bully should well, obviously they wouldn't have said the bully, but anyway, that I think so they had to revote and everything, and it became such a contentious thing, and because we had an odd number, there was a majority that wanted him, and I just said, you know what, I think that maybe the best way to resolve it is to have someone come in from another congregation, because once in a while they'll do that. They'll have somebody from a nearby congregation come in and work with the elder body. And nobody liked that idea. The circuit overseer thought it wasn't such a bad idea, but he knew that the main problem is that it hurts the feelings and insults the elder body, because it makes them look bad to the congregation. Like, why all of a sudden do we have to have somebody come in from like 30 miles away? Well, it wasn't 30 miles away, but from a distance, like a half-hour trip for him, whatever it is. What, is it because our elders are not competent? Why and we can't even have a presiding overseer that comes from our 8 elders or something? Like, nobody can do this. So they were insulted by that. Whereas I just thought, like, it doesn't matter how anybody wants to interpret it. I don't really personally care about my personal reputation. What I care about is people in the congregation being treated like decent, normal human beings, and that's not going to happen with the bully in power. So eventually the circuit overseer did select a man from Warwick, actually. Warwick. In England they say Warwick, but from Warwick, right where the headquarters is now. And he came, but he didn't. I forget. We had someone else become presiding overseer, someone more neutral, but he was sort of between a rock and a hard place. He was sort of malleable, I guess, which was not a good thing as long as the bully's there, because that's where the power block always was going to be. But anyway, to get to my main point, is that it became really clear that the entire agenda of this guy that came from another congregation, who's now in the circuit work, by the way, but his entire agenda was just to help these guys see how to get along better. Like that's what it was all about, was just getting along better. So if you think about it, the problem is that this one guy's a very big bully, a very significant bully, controlling people's emotions and playing stupid emotional games like he did with that guy that told us that he wasn't going to be an elder anymore as long as Gary was there. He'd just do these emotional tricks all the time. Like that didn't matter. All the stuff that he's doing, humiliating people, intruding in people's lives, and others on the body that were doing similar things, just not to the same extent. Like that's not the problem. The real problem is that you're just not getting along. And what is it about not getting along? Well, obviously the bully's not going to change. So what has to change is little Gary has to not be critical of this stuff. So that's what getting along means in that organization, is cowing to the biggest bully, the guy with the biggest mouth, the guy with the biggest whatever, biggest opinion. And I've seen that time and time again, where when they talk about unity and getting along, that's what it really amounts to, is everybody conforming to the biggest mouth, basically. That was just the experience of my elder body, but I remember talking to a lot of people in other congregations with relatively similar issues, not the same identical thing, but and it pretty much everywhere. Until something is unanimous, it doesn't happen. So that's partly why rules can be made by an elder body that they're not supposed to make, but they don't really get disciplined for it, because until they have to all agree that, yeah, this is a problem, we got to stop doing this. And that's how you get these cultural differences from congregation to congregation, where this congregation, like even 20 years ago, completely outlawed higher education, or I don't know, any number of other things you can think of that are apparently rules, but they're not really rules. The upper reaches of the organization do not make those kind of rules. Or let's put it this way: in the past, they never made those kind of rules. What movies to watch, what music to listen to, whether or not you can go to college, what circuit, what district convention you're going to go to. They never made those things rules, ever. And I could prove that, but anyway, that's another story. But because of the way they allow the local elders all this autonomy, and they don't actually discipline them until something becomes unanimous among that body, it goes on and on and on. So in a sense, even though the mother organization is not making these crazy rules happen, they are sanctioning it, they're allowing it, because of their policy and because of the white smoke. They want everybody to believe that the elders are appointed by Holy Spirit and they should be respected. So they're never going to come out and say that, yeah, like the circuit overseer is never going to come around to the congregation and say, yeah, up until recently, we have been saying that nobody should go to college ever under any circumstances, but we're just going to adjust that a little bit here. They're never going to do that, never, ever, ever, because what the elders say is considered gospel, tacitly, by implication. So that's kind of why, and I don't know, I hope that clears up a couple of things, because I hear this in the various JW, EXJW groups all the time, where it's like, well, we were not allowed to watch this cartoon, we were not allowed to go to college, we had to get married by the time we were whatever, and these other things, that it's like, no, those are never organizational rules. But the fact that your elders made them rules, or maybe your father did, was directly because of the esteem that the organization at the top level wants them to be held in. So it is their fault, even though they didn't directly make it happen.
It's a lot more political than people realize.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm sure every elder body is they're not all the same. Like I said, Westbury wasn't like that when I was there, at least. I mean, of course, maybe it was, but I just didn't see it because I wasn't on the inside. But so there are different dynamics in every congregation. But those things, like the way things are handled from the top down, where it's like, the service department says, no, you made that announcement prematurely, and they just want it to be about getting along and stuff like that. That'll happen anywhere. I mean, I could give you another example that's sort of
yeah, please do.
Yeah, one time, one of our elders, who was really a good guy, he very, very simple, just a homegrown kind of guy, like one of these guys that never almost never left the county, because we lived in a real redneck, like in the mountains of New Jersey, northwest. It's hard for people to imagine that because they think of New Jersey as being a big chemical dump or something, but it was almost like living in Arkansas or something, really. Very mountainous and very, very rural, a lot of cattle farms, And so he's one of these guys that never left the county almost, and it's a really, really simple guy, but he was a really humble, good guy. Didn't have a whole lot to say, in terms of like looking to give talks or comments or anything. But he was good for people that were also homegrown and wanted that because he understood people better than like me. I mean, I was from New York City, so he was really, I always thought of him as valuable to the congregation in the sense that any elder might be valuable. Again, I'm presupposing that the organization is correct, but whatever. So you have to bear with me on that. Um, and at one time, the district overseer, not the circuit overseer, but the district overseer, assembled the two bodies of elders, our elder body, and then the one that was in the congregation that we had come from. We used to share the Kingdom Hall with them, but we eventually built our own hall. Had both bodies of elders, like 20 men or something, or 24, I don't know, a ridiculous room full of men. He wasn't there. He just arranged for this to happen to discuss the brother I'm talking about, the fellow I'm talking about, the elder that was homegrown, the real simple guy, the Rudy kind of guy, because he had done something that the district overseer considered very, very serious. And I'll just tell you that it had to do with revealing a confidential matter, and he did. Whether or not it was really that important, I don't really know, because it was basically something he said to some elder in another congregation. So whatever. I don't know. I didn't think it was as serious as the district overseer thought. But anyway, it was really clear that the district overseer's decision, not just his, opinion or his feelings, but his decision was that this man needs to be removed. But he knew that he couldn't do that unilaterally. Yet it has to be unanimous among the body of elders. So he had both bodies meet together to question the guy about everything having to do with the issue. And it was really a circus. It was such a kangaroo court. It was just ridiculous. The direction basically was for everybody to just go around the room, and everybody, one after the other, have the opportunity to ask them a couple of questions. There was no necessarily a time limit on it, but it was reasonably, like, you really can't ask more than 2 or 3 questions because there's so many guys there, right? We're going to be here all year. So it became really obvious. I was like somewhere in the middle, so it was going to be a while until they got around to me. And I saw that every question that they asked this guy was trying to prove him guilty. It had nothing to do with really finding out how he felt about it, what really happened, or getting him to realize that, this is a little more serious than you probably thought. So we just want you to know why. Nothing like that. It was just condemnation from the beginning to the end. And I remember by the time it got around to me, the guy that was sitting next to me was so full of questions, the stupidest, most punctilious, ridiculous questions you can imagine, that it just had no bearing on anything. He was just crazy. I mean, I saw this guy in action many times. He's just nuts. And he just took like my time and his time, and plus the time of about 10 other guys with all his ridiculous questions. When it came around to me, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to pass. And I'm not going to vote with you. At the best, I'm going to abstain, because I'm not going to kick this guy out just based on these idiotic questions everybody's been asking, So in the end, the decision was to remove the guy. And I remember talking to him personally, and I just put my arm around him and said, "Hey, I just want you to know that you can't appeal this, and some of us are on your side, believe it or not." But his attitude was like, "Nope, I don't want to go through this again." So I feel really bad for the guy. But the point that I'm getting at is that it had to be unanimous, and it wasn't even just our elder body; it was the whole group that the district overseer had put together, and then he would finally put his stamp of approval on the whole thing. And that's the way things go. So whenever you see an elder I mean, if an elder is like, guilty of something that he could be disfellowshipped for, they will convoke a committee, and the whole elder body will probably meet to put that committee together. But then when it comes down to it, it's going to be 3 men, maybe 4, probably 3 men on the committee, and whatever they say goes. So if the answer is like he has to be disfellowshipped, that's it. You don't have to get the approval of the rest of the body. You don't have to get the approval of the circuit overseer. He's disfellowshipped, period. He's guilty. We're done. But anything short of that, I mean, the guy I was talking about first, that was our presiding overseer when I first came in, he was guilty of something that again, I don't want to go into it, but it was not a disfellowshipping offense, but it was like, oh my God, if he doesn't stop, it will be a disfellowshipping offense. It was just really bad decisions on his part, and even with that, it was obvious to anybody that he didn't qualify to continue serving, but everybody had to agree. Every single elder had to agree with that. So that's why things never happen, and they say, oh, we're waiting on Jehovah for this to happen, because the men can't do a darn thing unless it's unanimous or if it's a matter of judicial action. And in fact, the bully that I'm talking about, what finally happened with him, he's dead now, but what finally happened with him in terms of being an elder was our congregation split again and formed another congregation in the same Kingdom Hall. And happily for me, he went in the South congregation and I ended up in the North congregation. I don't know if that's really accurate to say. We didn't call them North and South, but one was called Sussex, the other Vernon. But he ended up in Vernon and I ended up in Sussex. And they sent another guy along with him that had already he was new to the congregation, and he was already part of his power block, And what happened was, over the course of a couple of years, well, I want to back up just a little bit. Anybody that plays emotional games like the bully would is by definition dishonest, because they're playing games that are just like the whole thing with, I'm not going to go there as long as Gary's there. That wasn't really what he was after. He was after getting me removed. He wanted to stay, So there's a certain amount of dishonesty whenever you play a game to kind of like get somebody in your court, or to get them to like you more than other elders, so that you'll respect him more. It's fundamentally just a dishonest thing. But as far as and then making things come out the way you want after the elder body had already decided something different, that's also fundamentally dishonest. But it's kind of hard to pin an actual lie on somebody like that, like he lied when he said this. But what happened over time, it took several years, I don't even know how long, is that every last elder in his new congregation, the Vernon congregation, every last elder finally caught him in a lie. And it finally got to the point where it wasn't just a silly little thing that we can dismiss and overlook. It was something that we have to discuss as an elder body without him. Well, I guess I don't even know how they did it, but because I wasn't there, I wasn't in this congregation anymore. But the point is that every single one of those elders finally realized that he's fundamentally a liar, including an old guy that I thought he's never going to come, because he was so. I think the old guy might have died by then. Maybe that's what the difference was, because I knew that he's never going to see it, because he's just so old. He just doesn't know what's going on. But it wasn't until every single one of those elders saw this guy. So he was lying for years and years and years, and playing emotional games with people for years, until it's unanimous. Nothing can be done about it. Absolutely nothing. You can tell the circuit overseer, and he can say, "Hey, bully, could you stop doing that?" But really, there's nothing you can do about it. So I think that should be an eye opener to anybody that wonders, like, why were things so goofy in my congregation, and why did this happen? It's probably because of that. It's because elders really do things pretty much independently, or not independently, but they do things. What's the word I'm looking for? Without compunction. Yeah, they just do whatever the heck they really want to.
Wow, and a whole lot more political than people realize.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
having everything have to come down to unanimous vote. Whoever has the loudest voice, or the most, it's just seen as the most power elder.
Yeah.
Seems to have the most swing in the way that the decisions are made. Yeah, that's way more political than I definitely realized.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
did you serve in any judicial committees? Were you ever there?
Oh yeah, yeah, a whole bunch. Yeah.
Can you go into how
Yeah,
that was handled?
yeah, and just a word about that before I go into detail. Um, Again, it's, if you're going to be on a judicial committee, you got to realize that there's a right and a wrong way to do it. But again, it's right according to the organization and according to the way they interpret the Bible. So I'm not by any means saying that anything was done correctly in the past, because I was involved with certain people getting disfellowshipped, and according to the rules, it was correct. They committed what they, I mean, like adultery or something. I mean, I can't see how you can ever make an excuse for that. But yeah, and other things like that. It's like, it's just clearly wrong. And depending upon their attitude, they have to be disfellowshipped. So when I say we were correct in disfellowshipping this person, that's assuming that the whole system of disfellowshipping and the implications of that, especially the way they've clamped down in recent years and made it to where like even normal family relationships are destroyed. It wasn't like that in the past so much, at least not in our congregations. That's clearly wrong. So the idea of disfellowshipping somebody because you know what's going to happen to them is just wrong. All right. So there's a lot of things I did as an elder that I really regret. But what motivated me to participate in this interview with you, Justin, as you know, is your interview with was his name Tony, I think, the one who was an elder, and he tended to always look for ways to not disfellowship people. I think that's the way I interpret it anyway. I was kind of like that. I mean, if somebody needed to be disfellowshipped, I'd certainly raise my hand and do it. But I was also, I really thought that the way people were treated was just so horrendous. And if you just kind of back off a little bit and let them just come to the meetings and express their faith and their love for God, and just lay off them a little bit, you'll see a really good person come out, and you won't be worried about, this person has to be disfellowshipped. I mean, unless it's a very, really severe case. So that was my thing. I mean, I was on one committee that it was actually two committees that it was two people that committed adultery. So there was two marriages involved with it. And this is when we had the guy from Warwick that I told you about that was working with us to try to help us get along better. He and I were the only ones that served on both committees, the committees for both people. Other than that, the other two guys were variable. And he did it that way because he wanted this commonality to see how things work among these different guys. And he saw me as the only one that was, I don't know, he wanted one person to be involved in both. And I guess he thought that should be me. So both of the people needed to be disfellowshipped. I'm sorry, that's not the story I wanted to tell you. I went off on the wrong thing. What I wanted to tell you about was somebody that came to us, and she was never really she was almost like an absentee witness, like you didn't see her that much. A lot of people didn't even know who she was, but she was known as a witness, and she came to us to tell us that she had geez, what had she done? She had well, she sinned with this guy that she met in a bar, okay? But it turns out she was doing a lot more than just sex. She was, smoking and drinking heavily and taking drugs and everything, and doing all kinds of heinous things, right? And so I was on the committee for that. And I remember one of the guys on the committee saying, when somebody comes to you and confesses something when there's no need to, it's not like they're afraid that they were already found out or something. When they do that, you almost can't disfellowship them, can you? I mean, isn't that repentance? Just telling you that this is what I did and I'm sorry, and I want your help to not do it again or something like that. So but anyway, we handled it. We asked all the questions and everything, and in the end, we decided that no, she just shouldn't be disfellowshipped. It was kind of borderline, but we decided no. Well, what happened with the rest of the elder body when they heard that? They were convinced that she was going to be the next one to get her head chopped off. But, and they knew they thought, yeah, these guys will do it. They were really upset. They were like, how could she not be disfellowshipped? How is that even possible? And I remember saying, like, well, you don't know because you weren't there. The reason for a committee is to ask the questions and allow them to express themselves, which indicates that the decision can't be made until you do that, because the answers matter and their attitude matters. So for you to assume that her attitude must be miserable and she did all this stuff, she should be disfellowship, you don't understand the process. if that's what you're thinking. So whatever, okay. The next thing you know, the circuit overseer comes around and he calls us into the back room and wants to talk to us, and he's reading from Watchtowers, and he's like, because he agreed with them. He's like, yeah, this is I don't know how this person could not have been disfellowship. And we were just like, well, maybe you needed to be there. Maybe because you weren't there is why you don't understand it. I mean, how could you be so stupid? This is the circuit overseer saying this, So we were just really kind of pissed off that the other elders went like over our heads and talked to the circuit overseer. But again, it's a situation where even though we were chastised for it, nothing really happened. Because if we really needed to be disciplined, everybody would have had to agree on it. So anyway, so that was my experience with, but I'll tell you one other thing about serving on committees that kind of, again, your interview with Tony just kind of reminded me of this, is that there was another situation, a third one. I'm going to talk about another one where it was involved two marriages and a case of adultery. It's not the one I was starting to talk about before. But in this particular case, it was the same men on both committees. So three of us worked together on both of them because it was one situation, even though it was two separate people, but it has to be two handled separately. And so the man was disfellowshipped. I mean, his attitude was just like deliberately did it, planned it because he wanted to get a scriptural divorce. It's okay, whatever. But the woman was really very different. She was really just really sorry that she did it and everything. And I will never forget that she started talking about her childhood at great length and talking about how her father did this, and then this happened, and this happened. And I started this, and I was the chairman of both committees, so I'm in the chairman seat. And I'm thinking, we don't have time for this. I mean, we'll be here for the rest of the year. And I had to kind of rein her in and say, we want to hear you express yourself, but could we kind of just stick to the matter at hand? And I don't remember exactly how I said it, but it was probably insensitive. In fact, I know it was insensitive. It was just like a by the book kind of like, this is the thing. This is the way it works. We want you to be quiet for a minute and take. I remember saying that this is a judicial committee and this is a serious matter. So could we just stick to that? That's pretty much what I said. Well, she was shocked because she knew me and she always thought of me as the elder you can talk to kind of thing. And she said that to me a number of times, so I'm not making that up. She always thought of me as one of those people you can talk to. And she just lambasted me and said, I can't believe you can be so insensitive. I just can't believe it. And she started crying. And so I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it. I immediately thought, oh my God, I mean, we're going to lose her. Like if I don't do something to reverse this, she's going to be disfellowshipped for no good reason, So I immediately apologized to her. I said, I'm really sorry. You're right. Anyway, and I just said, please continue what you were trying to tell us. And in the end, what ended up happening is the other elders kind of came to my side, and they kind of tried to gloss over what I had done wrong, and they but they in a way that was again being sensitive to her and allowing her to express herself, and in the end, she didn't have to be disfellowshipped. So I just use that example as the fact that I think what turned that whole thing around was her being upset with me, rightfully so, and me being the kind of person that recognized my error in a second, and I have no pride. I didn't do one thing as an elder out of a sense of pride. To me, it's all about the people. Well, I'll say the sheep, but it's all about the people. And if you're not doing it for them, what are you doing it for? So that's just an example of how I would, and there's a bunch of times when I did that. I apologized to somebody because I knew I said something wrong or did something wrong, And I just don't know anybody else that's going to do that. And I'm not trying to say that like I'm some kind of a great person. It's just like, what's the matter with the other guys that never do that? They can make mistakes, and you can go into the back room with somebody and say, hey, the way we just talked to so and so, I'm not thinking like the story I told you earlier about the guy with the sound, the 45-year-old guy. When I talked to the bully, if he was really really humble, he would have said, you're right. Let's go back, and I just want to express something to him. You know what I mean? That's not the way it went, because pride gets in the way. And these guys that don't have any qualifications to lead a flea circus, they really don't. The education elders get is like nothing. That management and leadership skills and organizational ability have nothing to do with their appointment. It's just those handful of scriptures, like, is he a drunk? Does he have one wife and not two? Whatever else. Does he argue a lot? That's, in terms of what would get you a job anywhere else on the planet, they don't have any qualification for anything. But pride gets in the way, because, like I said, this is the first time in their whole life with a lot of these guys that there are people that actually respect me, and they listen to me, and they actually go to me for advice, and they respect my counsel, which is a problem. The organization just doesn't see it, because they want all their men to be humble, but they're anything but humble, typically. I've known some guys that really are very good men, very good, humble men, with some of the skills that you would expect for somebody in a management position. But for the most part, it's very much a pride thing. And their pride gets wounded anytime somebody complains to the circuit overseer about somebody, or, about, like, if somebody went to the circuit overseer and said, I had an interaction with Gary Alt the other day, and I was wondering if you could tell me where I'm wrong. And the circuit overseer realizes that, oh, well, Gary was out of line to do that. And now when he talks to me, I'm going to be really pissed off at the sister that said that, right? Because I'm an elder, and she just hurt my professional feelings and went over my head. So yeah, it's very much about politics and very, very much about pride. And I'm not saying it's identical in every congregation, but that's what's happening a lot of times.
Well, definitely good on you for seeing the humanity in people and helping that sister out when she spoke up. I know a lot of elders, especially in that situation, when it's a judicial committee, you're above them in that case, would have just kept her in her place. So definitely good on you for doing that. And you mentioned a very good point about how they always stress humility, humility, humility. And you're right. I saw that the same thing in the congregations that I was in, where you did have some elders were humble, nice people.
Yeah,
You also had the ones where you could tell, especially when I was appointed ministerial servant, that this was the big wig in the congregation. He wants everybody to look up to him and do what he says.
Mm-hmm.
So very, very interesting. One more question about the judicial committee process. Did you feel that you had to follow the elders book to a T, or did you feel that you guys as a body had some wiggle room as far as the rules in the elders book goes for disciplining somebody?
Yeah, we pretty much went by the book. And I guess I really was kind of tended to do that, because before I came along, they never did. They just made it up. And if you said to them, well, let's research this, let's look at what does it say in the book, or the particular problem at hand. And I'll give you an example. There was a fellow that was he had just been reinstated, so I had never met him. I moved to the congregation while he was in his fellowship state. He got reinstated, and then, like, immediately they wanted to form another committee because of a well, I'll say a drinking problem. I mean, again, he's part of our community now, and I don't want to give away a confidence, but he's a great guy. But at the time, he had a drinking problem. It wasn't actually me. It was his father, who was also on the elder body but couldn't be on the committee, obviously. Had asked us to read an article in the Awake. I mean, they always go to the Awake, or what are you going to do? But he wanted us to research alcoholism and, like, what, just learn a little bit about it, because it's not as simple as you got to stop drinking, And the other two guys on the committee refused to read it. I mean, they outright told me that I'm trying to get my glasses straight here. I can see my image that they're not straight. He outright they outright said to me, like, no, we don't have to read that. Like, well, this is the first time we're handling a case of alcoholism. Give me a break. Well, everything they did was wrong. Everything they said was completely wrong. Showed no understanding of the nature of alcoholism. I'm not an expert on alcoholism, but at least I know enough to realize how wrong they were, you know. So that was a case of they just didn't go by the rules. And I mean, I'll tell you one thing that the bully used to do, and I think he just continued doing this. I don't know. I just tried to counter it by example. When somebody got this fellowship, he would literally say that Jehovah doesn't even want to look at you. He's so fed up with you. He's so not fed. He wouldn't say fed up. He'd say he's so disgusted with you that he doesn't even want to look at you until you really repent and come around. And I was like, when I heard that, I was like, oh my God. I mean, how could you say that to somebody? It was so what I started saying to people was, there was a scripture in, I don't know, Psalms or something, that I forget where it is, but it says something like, being under his wrath is for but a minute, but being under his pleasure is for eternity, or something like that. And I would just read that to people to let them know that, yeah, I know this is discipline. It's going to be hard, but really, and again, this is assuming that it's all correct, you know, so please bear with me. But I would say what he really wants and what we really want is, we want you back in our company. We nobody's happy that you're being disfellowshipped. It's just, it's necessary. Again, we thought it was necessary. You know, you know, just be aware that being under his good graces is much better than being out of favor temporarily or whatever. But it's that kind of crap that would happen all the time. So they just really never researched anything. And then, I don't know, at some point, I think just by exerting that influence, because I was a young guy. I was 28 when I was appointed, and these guys were all in their 40s and 50s and 70s, you know. So it was pretty uncomfortable being like the, what is it, Elihu in the book of Job? I think it was Elihu, was like the voice of reason. He was like the youngest of all these four guys. But that's the way I felt all the time. It was like, I don't look at myself as some kind of genius or having special wisdom, but these guys, it's like, oh my God, you know, the things that they'd say to people. So I think I tried to get to where we were as close to the book as possible. But when you ask that question, I mean, I guess what probably some of the listeners are going to be thinking about is, like, what about like cases of pedophilia? Well, of course, my time on the elder body was before they finally got around to the idea of at least calling the legal department to find out what are the laws in your state as far as reporting it. They still don't do it, but you know, but that's the idea. So my time in the elder body was before that, but I never really served on a committee that had to do with pedophilia. I heard about some. The closest I ever came to it was a situation where somebody in the congregation he was autistic, in a very severe case of autism, didn't really hardly communicate with the outside world at all. Very, very strange behavior, you know, very self-destructive, you know. And actually all the boys in that family were kind of like that, except his older brother was a little bit closer to normal. He was in our congregation. And at one point, one of this kid's school teachers saw some bruises on him and reported it to whomever. And she was convinced that it had to be from his older brother, because his older brother was kind of like, took the one that was in our congregation that I said was probably the most sane person in the family. He was like charged by the parents to kind of like, you know, look after him whenever they couldn't, you know. And he was always very gentle with the boy. I mean, I could see that there were many times when anybody would have been at wit's end and just wanted to clobber the kid, you know. But this fellow was just really patient with him and very loving and everything. It was really hard for me to believe that he actually abused his brother in any way. So the family, when it was going to go to court, the parents asked me if I'd be willing to testify as a character witness. And I said, you know, I'd be happy to, but I have to check with the legal department to, you know, find out if I can do that or not. And sure enough, they said, no, you can't. I was like, I kind of expected that answer, but I was really disappointed because I really wanted to. I mean, I'm not going to go in there and say that, no, it's absolutely false, because if it is true, then it's true. but I can at least give true testimony that from the best of my ability, I don't see any kind of negative behavior from this guy ever. But I couldn't do it because the book says no. So there were times when I went by the book that I was like very disappointed to have to do that. But there are plenty of times, and just like Tony, the guy you interviewed before, that I definitely didn't go by the book. But it wasn't so much in judicial things; it was more just like on personal level, where there's like maybe two brothers visiting somebody. Well, actually, one time it did have to do with the Judicial Committee, and that was the time when the fellow that had the drinking problem, he would have been disfellowshipped in any other circumstance. But I read the material, and I knew from experience with a member of my family, an uncle of mine, I knew a little bit about alcoholism, and I realized where it was going to go. He was going to be disfellowshipped. And we had got a letter at some point from the service department saying that it's not appropriate to spend time working with someone that's in a judicial committee setting. Like, in other words, there's supposed to be one meeting. The judicial committee is supposed to consist of one meeting with the person, and it's about an hour long, whatever it takes. But by the time that meeting is done, you should have arrived at a decision, disfellowshipped or not. And then, do we announce, if it's not a disfellowshipping, do we announce that he was reproved? But that's basically it. Those are your only options. It's not appropriate to extend it and say, well, we have to reconvene next week after we find out this or that. It's not appropriate to say, let's work with this guy because, he has a drinking problem. Let's see if we can maybe help him get on the wagon. It's not appropriate. You have to make a decision. Well, I knew that's so stupid. I don't care who in the service department. I don't care if it was the whole governing body made that up. It's just stupid, and it's destructive. Because an alcoholic is going to stop drinking this second because you told them to. Really? I mean, that's what they expect. It's amazing. I mean, first of all, you could actually cause serious health problems and even death for someone if they go into seizures as a result of cold turkey. Anyway, I just kind of knew that, and I said, well, you know what? I'm gonna just recommend something to you guys. I don't know if you want to. If this is a good idea or not, but I was thinking that I don't know the guy that long, and I think he's been out for quite a while. He was only reinstated quite recently. I said, I would like to study with him, just have a Bible study with him and just sort of, because I think he doesn't even know the basics anymore, and they kind of listened, and they said, yeah, okay. So we didn't have to disfellowship him because of that. And, but what ended up happening was we really never studied anything. I would just go to his house and just talk and just say, how's it going? And he had a calendar that had a big X crossed through every day that he didn't have a drink. And it got to be months and months and months that he didn't have a drink. And I remember just telling him, you're doing great. I'm really proud of you. It's really, really hard work. And we never opened the publication or the Bible. We just talked, But I portrayed it to these other guys as if it's a Bible study. I probably even counted it as a Bible study on my field service report. All of that is pretty much against the rules. That's not by the book. But I did it because, what are you going to do? You're going to kill this guy. Literally, you could kill him. But there were probably a lot of other situations where, for example, if we're talking to a woman that, and this has happened several times, a woman that was experiencing any kind of physical abuse at home. The mantra is that there are only 3 scriptural reasons for separation, and none of them are ever going to apply. You'll be dead by the time they apply. It's just another way of repressing women. And I just, one way or the other. I mean, I can go into a few stories, but one way or the other, I just would just not treat it that way. I would just listen to them, and I wouldn't try to recommend anything, but I would kind of point it in the direction of, you got to take care of yourself, even if taking care of yourself means getting the hell out of this house and don't go back unless there's some major, super amazing miracle happens, because he will hit you again. It's as simple as that. So a man that hits his wife is not normal. It's not a normal behavior. He has a problem. And staying home and having more respect for him and all this bullshit that the society says you're supposed to do does not solve the fundamental problem. And that's that he basically needs to see a psychiatrist for a long period of time, and then maybe, just maybe, in some alternate universe, it might be appropriate to move back in. That's the way I would handle stuff like that. And those weren't judicial committee meetings necessarily. I don't remember I don't think an elder body wants to have a judicial committee over a man abusing his wife physically, because it's, I don't know. But anyway, but so yeah, to some extent, I went by the book. I always say I could go by the book and be a jackass as good as anybody. But there were also lots of, and I did that a lot. I really did, and I regret some of it. But there are also times that I know, just like Tony, the guy you talked to the other day, maybe that was a while ago, but somebody just brought it to my attention. I don't know. But just like that, I could also say, like, no, we're not going to do this. I'm just not. I don't care who says what. I don't care if the circuit overseer tries to throw me in the fire or something. We're not going to do this to somebody, So I hope that answers your question, but that's the way I would approach things.
Yeah, it definitely answered my question. Yeah, thank you. So I got one more question for you.
Okay.
How exactly did you end up waking up, and then what are you doing now? I know you mentioned your book a couple of times. I know people would like to hear about that too.
Yeah. Okay. So I try not to make this a long story, but this what we're talking about kind of makes it appropriate to, I guess. What ended up happening was I eventually was removed back in the, I don't know, late 90s or something, like after about 10 or 15 years of serving. I don't know. It was because of something I did, but it was not really a very serious thing. It was really basically because somebody was offended by it. When I talked to the elders about it initially, and by then, again, we were like, the bully was in the south part and the rest of the good guys were in the north part. So I actually had a pretty good elder body by that time that knew. We were in a farm congregation. So we had a couple of guys at Watchtower Farm that really knew how to treat people with dignity. I could give you a few examples of that involving people in my own family, but that's another story. But they knew how to actually treat people the right way. And when this thing came to light, it was just an indiscretion. It was, you'd laugh if I told you about it, but I'm not going to go into it because it involves other people. But they initially said, well, oh, all right, well, we think you were an effective elder, and you still are. So we see no reason to change anything. So that was it. So I took my lumps, and that was it. Well, then these people continued to complain. So they basically came to me and said, well, here's the deal. We're going to have to involve the whole elder body. Actually, 2 elder bodies, really, I think. Maybe not. I don't know. But it's going to have to, and we don't know how it's going to go. Chances are it will be fine. They'd say that, yeah, it was kind of dumb, but let's continue. Maybe you shouldn't give public talk for a little while or so. I don't know, whatever. But it could go the other way. They could decide that we need to remove you. So it's probably easier if you just step down voluntarily. So that's what I did. I said, all right, to keep the peace. And really for these other people that were offended at what I did, I thought, yeah, you know what, I'll just step down. That's fine. Well, immediately I started to be treated differently by virtually everybody. It was amazing. Within a week, all of a sudden, people don't know how to act towards me, and it was very upsetting. And what ended up happening is I got very depressed about it. Fast forward a bunch of years, and I was reappointed as a ministerial servant. And right about the time of the new generation teaching, the overlapping thing, and I just kept hearing things that were just like, this organization is not what I signed up for. I mean, this is crazy. I've never seen such a big change in a teaching that actually had almost no scriptural backing. There was almost no logical discussion back in the days when Fred Franz would write the articles, and he'd have a whole article just on what we used to believe and all the Hebrew and Greek words and types and antitypes. And then you'd have the next article about what we now believe. And then the third article about, I don't know, whatever. It was just a joke. I mean, and I don't think anybody took it seriously, really. Even the most faithful people. What I'd hear people say is like, well, that's interesting. So that's okay. So generation overlaps. But they would basically say like, but just don't expect me to explain it to anybody because I don't really understand it. You don't understand it because it doesn't make sense. And there's actually no scriptural discussion about it. It was just stated as a fact. Like, this is the Bible's definition of generation. Anyway, so I would hear things like that, and I'd be like, what? And not just that, but a lot of things. kept happening, and I was like, did I just hear that right? Like, what happened to this organization? And around that time, at the same time, I started to desire to reach out for more privileges, to even be appointed as an elder again. I didn't really want to do that for years, but I finally got to where I thought I'd like to do it again. And so I talked to the presiding overseer, and he said, I'll have to get back to you. And I was like I said, but like, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? And he says, we'll have to get back to you. And I'm thinking, you have to get back to me? Like, what? Don't you know me? Like, you don't, like, obviously every 6 months or every 6 months, my name comes up with a whole bunch of guys that are servants that could be elders, or that are nothing but could be a ministerial servant. I know that happens. I was on the elder body for years and years and years. So what do you mean you'll get back to me? What the heck does that mean? So when they finally got back to me, they basically said, and I to this day, I don't remember what the first thing that they said was, but because it eventually became a whole list of things. But they basically said that you're too, I don't know, argumentative or belligerent or something, I don't know, whatever the heck it was. And I was like, when I think back like 10, 15 years to when the bully was the problem and the way I handled it, which I didn't go into detail with you before, but I will say that it was not entirely appropriate. I was expecting like too much of them. Like, I thought that these are elders, so whatever, if I hit them with both barrels, they should just be able to figure this out and accept it and act accordingly. But that actually is not entirely reasonable, actually, because like anybody that deserves a little bit of consideration, you don't just hit them with everything that they need to change and expect them to change today. That's so I said, yeah, going back like 10, 15, whatever years, I could see where I was like that. I wasn't always reasonable, and I probably contributed to some disunity. But I'm thinking, like, now, like, since then, is there anything that you see? And they never, ever, ever could give me an example. Never. All they did was every time I met with them, they would add another word. So if they said belligerent the first time, they would say, you're actually a smiter. I remember them saying you're a smiter, which is not a word that you even hear out here in the real world. And then they started saying things like even the sisters don't want to work with you in service anymore, which was baloney, because I all the time there were people saying, hey, can I be in your car group today? I want to take you on a return visit with me. Can you sit in on my Bible study this week? It happened all the time. So I'm like, what? So it became really clear that they're just trying to cover their own tracks. They're making it up, But what ended up happening was that it sent me into a real state of depression, because even though I knew better as an intelligent person, but especially as a former elder, I knew that the way they were talking to me and treating me was completely inappropriate, actually wrong. And I would never, ever talk to somebody like that. At the same time, we're supposed to respect the arrangement. And to an extent I did. I took it seriously. So I was like at 2 or 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep, I'd just be thinking about what a piece of crap I am. I mean, what's the matter with me? And I started thinking that maybe this is Jehovah's way of just kicking me out of the organization to make his job easier at Armageddon. So, because he already knows I'm not going to make it anyway. That's the way my thought process went. So it just got worse and worse and worse. And what ended up actually happening, it's sort of out of context of this discussion, but my then wife made it happen, because she saw this happening to me, and she saw that, and she always sided with the elders no matter what. It didn't matter how right or how wrong they were. She always sided with the elders, because that's what you're supposed to do. And you're supposed to also respect your husband, I suppose, but that didn't factor in too well. So she basically came up with a publicity campaign, I guess I would say, to get me kicked out. And so eventually we got divorced, and I remarried a couple of years after that. I guess 13. I guess about 2 to 3 years after that, I got remarried, and I had proof that I had so-called scriptural rights to do that, scriptural grounds, I guess they say, but they never considered that, So they just heard that I got remarried to a girl that had nothing to do with the witnesses. And they put together a judicial committee like as soon as they heard about it, and that was my wedding gift from them. And they disfellowshipped me for adultery. not because I committed adultery, but because I didn't tell them anything that indicated I had scriptural grounds to remarry. So therefore, it's an adulterous marriage, which means my wife is also an adulterer. I mean, they just insult everybody. It's they have no idea the implications of their stupid ideas and the stupid things they say. But they basically turned her against the witnesses forever because they so insulted her by basically calling her an adulteress because she married me. But anyway, that's what finally got me kicked out. And I spent the next, let's see, I guess a couple of years after that. It is a couple of years after that, because that was in 2016. And 2018 is the year that I decided to start to do some research. And because I still thought it was the truth. I really did. I know it's goofed up. They do a lot of things wrong. And I wish they would correct this or that, but it's still the truth. I mean, who else has the truth, right? And so I finally decided to do some research using almost entirely the Society's publications. I also use Crisis of Conscience, sorry. But what I found by reading that was that it was nothing of what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be, because I had read apostate stuff in the past. I didn't care. I thought, if I have the truth, how's that going to hurt me? It's like, so I didn't make a habit of it. But I read stuff in the past, and most of it was garbage. It was just like, to what extent they're right or wrong, I don't really care. It's just nasty personal attacks and no hope for the future, nothing to replace the old teachings. That's what I always thought, So I thought that was going to be the same thing with Crisis of Conscience. But turns out, oh my God. I mean, I think everybody listening knows this already, but if you don't, you should read the book. This is a humble man that had some honest misgivings and couldn't see how he can continue serving in the capacity that he did, given the way things operate, and had no malice toward anybody. He wasn't trying to tear down your faith, like you got to leave the organization now and stop believing that Jehovah is, none of that stuff. It was totally humble. So, but after that, I basically checked every reference that I could possibly check that he put in his book. I checked it with the publications I had access to, including going back to the very first Watchtower, because you can find that stuff. And little by little, I realized, long after I finished Crisis of Conscience, and I was just on my own, just studying stuff, I realized that, wow, they're really wrong about, I think one of the first things I discovered was about 1914, that, yeah, that's pretty out of whack, actually. So, which kind of throws everything out of whack. I mean, the appointment of the faithful and discreet slave, which is now it's the governing body. It's not just everybody. It's just these guys. And it just little by little, I started to say, well, okay, they're really wrong about that. But that's okay. We're still living in the last days. Armageddon's still coming. Jehovah's still using one organization. It's the only one. And then I'd find out about more stuff, and I'd say, it's like, wow, it's like 20% wrong. Like it's 30% wrong. Or it's 40% wrong. And I started to realize, you know what? There's no point quantifying this anymore. If they're so wrong about so many really key things, it doesn't matter about the rest. They don't have the truth. And I don't care. And so I stopped studying about it because it's like, well, I don't want to dwell on the Watchtower any one more minute. I don't have time for it. It's not helping me in any way trying to go forward. So I stopped. So to this day, I don't know, like the condition of the dead, that was the first thing I learned on my first Bible study. I was thrilled to learn that. Are they right about that? I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to bother researching it because, like, when you come down to it, how are you going to find out for sure until you die? And if we are unconscious forever, we never will find out, right? So, I just realized that and then it took a little while to do the studying about cults, and I studied about cults in general and what determines a cult before I made a determination about the Jehovah's Witnesses. I was very, very liberal about it, I guess you'd say. And my first conclusion was, no, of course they're not a cult, because I was thinking about Westbury, my experiences where they didn't control everything. And I thought, how could you say it's a cult? Where was the mind control? Where was the emotional control? Where was the behavior control? None of that existed where I came in. But then I finally started thinking about the other places I had been and thought they're actually not anomalous. They're more actually standard throughout the organization. So, anyway, that's how I finally got out. But I realized as soon as I got out that I don't need to get validation from any of my former, brothers and sisters. I went through that when I was actually several years before I was disfellowship, when my first wife's information campaign started, and I was basically treated as if I was disfellowship 4 years before there was even a committee. So 4 years before I got remarried, and I realized like immediately that this brotherhood is a joke. It just, all these people that I helped in various ways, they just dismissed me instantaneously, even though I wasn't even disfellowshipped. It was 4 years before that. They just instantaneously said, "Yeah, forget about this guy." So I realized that that's a cruel joke, but I did spend a certain amount of time like trying to justify myself, like trying to get people to understand, um, not so much where my first wife was wrong, but where I could defend myself against her accusations, and it was really, really obvious how wrong she was. And even my so-called worldly friends saw that because they knew all the details about where I was and everything when what she said happened. I used to have a radio show, an FM radio show, and when you're on the radio live and people are calling in and talking to you on the air, it's sort of obvious like where you are, you know. So she's accusing me of doing stuff I would have had to have been like 30 miles away at home to do. But anyway, all the witnesses believed it because they just believe anything that the person that's at the meetings all the time says, and they knew that I was kind of like, I guess, fading. I was at all the meetings, but I just wasn't the same person anymore. So they believed it. So I realized that the brotherhood was a sham. And after the initial, months of trying to justify myself to kind of win back a few friendships, I realized that's just a waste of time. It just doesn't make sense. So I just realized I have to just go forward with my life. I opened my own insurance agency. I had been in insurance before that, but I decided to open my own agency, which took every penny I had and all my time and effort and everything. And just I never went through any of these like I became a life coach eventually, but I never went through any kind of like going to a life coach. Like I know somebody in one of the XJW groups that has what he calls a boot camp, which is a fabulous program. I'd recommend it for anybody. But I didn't see like anytime I look at this stuff, I'd be like, yeah, I'm past that already. And in hindsight, I can't really say that I was really 100% past because there's always something in your unconscious mind that kind of percolates every so often. But basically, I was done with it. I mean, just the way it all happened, I just had no need for this so-called brotherhood. And I knew I was never going to set foot in the Kingdom Hall as soon as they made the decision to disfellowship me. And that was, by the way, it was 2 committees because I appealed it only because I knew I was going to lose my kids. I didn't think the decision was ever going to change, but I just thought if I don't do everything I can in my power to preserve my relationship with my kids, I'll kick myself in the butt every day for the rest of my life. So I at least did what I felt, everything I could do. But anyway, I just decided that I don't have any need for this, and it doesn't define who I am, and I'm not going to let I don't care what they think about me. If I walk down the street and I run into somebody, which I never do, but if I ran into an old friend or something, I don't care if they don't want to talk to me. It's like they're stuck. I really feel badly for them. They are really, really stuck if they think that this guy can't be talked to because of something that we don't even know anything about. It's like they have a major problem. I don't have a problem with that. I have other problems, but I don't have a problem with. So it's like whatever. I don't care. I'm not defined by the organization. So I go, and then I became a life coach because I realized that I had sort of always been a life coach because I think it's more of a personality type than it is an actual vocation. It's just people naturally have always come to me when they wouldn't talk to anybody else about something. And at times I've been like, why are they telling, like, this is somebody I just met. Why are they telling me, all these gory details about this or that when they've never told anybody about it, something that happened, years ago. And I started to realize, and it happened at work a lot, where somebody would ask to talk to me about something, and it turns out it had nothing to do with work. It was just personal things about the family, and other things like that. And I would just listen and just say, oh wow, so if I heard this right, you talking about your son? Did I get that right, or was it your daughter? And I would just like kind of confirm everything I heard, and then just ask questions about, oh, so then what happened, and this and that. And in the end, I wouldn't really recommend anything. I wouldn't say you should do this or that because I just don't like giving advice. I don't think it's appropriate I will if it is appropriate, but it seldom is. And then they come back to me the next day and say, "Oh, wow, Gary, thank you so much for talking to me. You helped me so much to decide that I'm going to do this, or that." And I would say, "Oh, well, I'm glad you appreciated our time together, and I'm glad it's working for you. But what do you mean I advised you? Like, what did I advise you?" And they say, "Oh, well, when you told me that I should just stay in my apartment and just do this to get by and this and that," and I'd say, "Oh, okay, but actually that was your idea. Remember, you came up with that after we talked about this, and that. I'm just telling you that because you are the one that deserves credit for when you make a good decision and do things in a positive way. I don't get credit for that. Yeah, okay, I helped you, I listened to you, but you're the one that made the decision and is carrying it out, so you get the credit." And that's what life coaches are supposed to do. And so I realized, wow, I am a life coach. So I saw a program about getting certified as a life coach, and I realized that's what I want to do. So that's what I've been doing for a couple of years now. And I just say that because it's about moving forward. It's about not getting stuck in a definition of ourselves that is actually the definition that the organization put on us. Like I don't say, yeah, I'm disfellowshipped. If somebody says, "What's your relationship with the organization?" I'll never say, "Oh, I'm disfellowshipped," because I'm not. That's the verb. They took that action. They disfellowshipped me, but I am not a disfellowshipped person because it only means something to them. It means nothing to my landlord, to my neighbors, to the guys at the restaurant I go to, the guys I work with. It means nothing to anybody. Only the Jehovah's Witnesses think it means something. So therefore, it means nothing to me. So it's just about moving on, and I've chosen to do that by embarking on the career I did, and a couple of the books, which I'll tell you about if you want. But that's what I'm doing today, doing the life coach thing.
It's awesome that you're helping people out.
Yeah.
After leaving that. So what are your books?
Oh, well, I was never an author. I'm a musician mainly. That's my main artistic endeavor. I've written like hundreds of songs and I've recorded them. You can look up Gary Alt and I don't know, on Spotify or YouTube, and I don't know. It helps if you have a name of a song or something, I guess. But anyway, that's what I've always done. I never thought I'd write a book, but somebody encouraged me to write a book about my story. I guess they were thinking about not just the 4 years of getting out, but the whole picture of how I got remarried and everything. I don't know. But so I wrote it in a novel form, and it's called, I probably have it right in front of me, believe it or not. And this really is always here where I'm sitting. But it's called Force of Will. And Tan Swiftwater is the author because it's written as a novel based on a true story. And I thought you can kind of get into trouble with that because you're going to be talking about people that if somebody recognizes themselves in it and they're not flattered by it, so I did it as a based on a true story. So like all the geographical locations are just about 20, 30 minutes away from where they really happened, and a lot of the people, the names are all changed, and some of the conversations and characters are composites and things like that. But it's basically the true story. There are a couple things in the book that I completely made up, but it has nothing to do with the actual story. It's just like what I had to do to tell the story. So basically, all the basic facts are true, and the JWs are sort of a character unto themselves in the book, because it's not necessarily about how I got out or bashing the witnesses or proving that they're wrong. It's just how I climbed out of this incredible hole that my first wife made for me. And by the end of the book, it's not even clear because I haven't done the research yet that I talked about. So it's not even clear. It's just clear that I'm not a witness anymore and I have no intentions of going back. But it's not clear, like, what are my beliefs at this point, because I wasn't even sure about them. Anyway, that's an old one. But the one that it seems like a lot of people, I don't know, I'm surprised at the amount of interest in this because it's kind of small, but it's a short book, but it's called Bethel Days. And it's, as it says on the cover, it's an unadulterated expose of my interactions with and impressions of 27 governing body members and other heavies. So it goes into a bunch of the things that I talked about, like I mentioned Leo Greenlees and other people that have made the sandbox that pedophiles use to operate among the Jehovah's Witnesses with a lot of freedom. It's because of these guys. It's because it comes from the top down, and I don't think all of them are part of it. Because if you understand the way the committees work on the governing body, the way it operates, it's not as simple as saying that if this happens in the organization, it's obviously all of their fault. If you understand the way the governing body works, that's not really an accurate thing to say. But there are a few that, yeah, it's it's because of their interpretation of the two witness rule and their cockeyed view of confidentiality and what is essentially equivalent to Catholic confession. And they don't want to discourage people from doing that by reporting them to the police if they've been told that, yeah, I just had sex with a little kid, so that's the way they do it, But anyway, it is what I said. It's an expose of my relationship with. I didn't know all of them personally, but I knew all 15 when I was at Bethel, and I've known some since then. A couple of them have been at my house for the weekend. Like Garrett Lurch was a friend that came to the house for the weekend one time. And a few others that, like, I knew Sam Hurd as my first circuit overseer. I comment a lot about there's a couple of pages about that famous talk that he's given about women's brains being 10% smaller than men's, and that's proof that they're not suitable for leadership positions or for headship. And I go into like the logic behind that. It's, there's two logical fallacies that he's using big time. It's not necessarily anything new that you didn't know, because everybody knows that. Well, actually, a lot of people might not know that it's true that there is a difference in brain size on average between men and women according to body weight and not body weight, to stature and body, stature, height and stature. But it doesn't mean anything. That's the whole point. It has nothing to do with a woman's ability to have headship. It's so stupid. Anyway, so I go into that because I knew Sam Hurd and I know Lurch, and I make pretty extensive comments about a couple that I've never met before, but I've seen enough of the nonsense, the dumb. I don't know. I'll mention Anthony Morris as an example. He just said some of the dumbest things I've ever heard anybody say that are just so intuitively wrong and so destructive. And I know he's not in the governing body anymore, but that's just an example of somebody I feel like I know, because all these guys in our congregation knew him personally, and they would come to the congregation, and if I said, like, I just heard Anthony Morris say this thing about anybody that doesn't take full advantage of family worship night is not going to be prepared for Armageddon. Why is he allowed to say things like that? Does he have any idea how bad that is? To say something so monumentally discouraging for all these women that can't have a family study because their husbands won't allow it, and we're supposed to obey our husbands according to you nutcases. So I would say, and they would defend him. So I kind of feel like I knew him personally, and then I know people that knew Steve Lett personally, and again the guy that says the last day of the last days or the last days of the final days or whatever it is. So that's what it's all about. It's a relatively short book. And it's kind of comedic in spots, not in the sense, like, if you're talking about pedophilia, I don't see that there's any room for humor there. It's a very serious topic, but there's a lot of humor in it and sort of lightheartedness, and I think an even-handed approach that, as Barbara Anderson says on the back, she says he gives discredit where it's due and credit to those who deserve it, often using lighthearted colloquial jargon. So that. Even Barbara recognizes that you can't really say that every governing body member is a complete louse. Some of them were actually good guys, but they just missed. Well, as Ray Franz said, they are all victims of victims. In other words, they were raised by a mother, maybe a mother and father, who was a victim of a cult, or if you want to call it a cult, and then they became victims of it. And that's how they grew up. And so the fact that they ended up on the governing body does not necessarily mean that they at some point know that this is a cult, but they actually believed all this time that this is the truth. This is God's organization, the only one with God's spirit. And they still believe that, even after they've seen all this crap over the years. One of them, Ray Franz, happened to wake up to the point where he realized, like, no, this can't be right. Whereas the others just always thought, like, well, I know we never said the organization's perfect, but. And then there are the ones that are really bad, that have to do with policy that establishes the sandbox that creates pedophilia or allows pedophilia. So So it's an even-handed thing, and I think that if you're going to be like triggered by it, don't read it. I don't want anybody to feel triggered to the point where it sends them into the throes of depression. But a lot of people, more than I ever anticipated, have already read it. I'm actually surprised. And everybody so far is like, they thought it was great. I don't know, whatever, because it's, like I said, it's not something that everybody's going to want to read. But there you have it. And I've written some other things, but that's enough. That's enough to tell you about, I guess.
Awesome. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your stories and your books.
Yeah.
And, I really appreciate your time. Hopefully I can have you on again.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Justin. I appreciate it. And like I said, I was motivated by that interview you had with Tony. I wish I could meet him someday. And by the way, I just want to say that I've heard this from a number of people, that the typical XJW, that's a man that used to be an elder, is kind of the same ilk. They were the kind of elder that was completely out of step with everybody, because they were really concerned about people as individuals, not just what this is going to do for the organization, the congregation in Jehovah's name. They're actually interested in the welfare and health of the individuals. That seems to be universal with all these guys that are ex-elders, ex-JWs. So it eventually, I guess, I don't know if you want to say the good guys eventually leave, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, thank you again for having me. Yeah, I think so.
So I really hope you guys enjoyed that interview. There's so much to unpack there. I mean, this is almost one of those videos that you got to watch it twice just to be able to catch everything. So I definitely want to thank Gary once again for coming onto the channel and sharing all of that stuff with us. And I dropped in the description below links to his books for those that are interested. Now, just as I said in the introduction, the one thing that really stuck out to me during this interview was just how political the elder body actually operates. For all this talk about being no part of the world, being led by Holy Spirit, keeping a higher standard for themselves compared to the rest of the world, for all that talk, when you really dig below the surface and you see how things are handled behind the scenes, the way they operate is very much like the same worldly political structure that they judge so much. And so once again, another case where the Jehovah's Witnesses are not all that better than the people that they look down upon. So with all that being said, I want to thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your time. Please take it easy on yourself, and I will catch you in the next one.